Welcome everyone, my name is Zach, and in this video I'm comparing the Polestar 2 and the Tesla Model 3. And for this comparison, I'm talking about the standard Polestar 2 with no performance package and the long-range dual-motor Tesla Model 3. I think these are the two most popular versions of each car, and the ones that are most similar, making for the fairest comparison. And yes, I own a Tesla Model 3 long-range dual-motor, but don't assume that that makes me biased. I was this close to putting a deposit down on the Polestar 2 last year because I was really impressed with what I saw after the car was unveiled at the Geneva Auto Show in March of 2019. And I was really excited to see a major auto manufacturer producing a compelling electric vehicle that wasn't a Tesla. However, my timeline for needing a new vehicle changed last year, and with the Model 3 already on the market, I figured I would drive one and see what I thought. And combined with some extensive research, I decided to go with the Tesla Model 3 long-range dual motor. But that doesn't mean that I think it's the better car for everyone. And so for this comparison, I'm going to be talking about performance, charging, technology, cost, styling, build quality, practicality, and safety. And one disclaimer before I dive in, a couple of the points I'm going to make are specific to the United States and may differ in your country. I'll try to point these out so that if you live in a different country, you can look into those independently. Okay, so starting with performance, I'm going to break this down into a few subcategories: acceleration, suspension and handling, and efficiency. So starting with acceleration, both of these cars have two electric motors, one on the front axle and one on the rear, making them both all-wheel drive. And with similar power and torque numbers, the 0 to 60 time on both of these cars is also very similar. And on top of that, tests have shown that both of these times are understated, and you can realistically expect a low 4-second 0 to 60 time in both of these cars. And you're not going to notice a 0.1 or 0.2 second difference in 0 to 60 time, so I think it's fair to say that these are going to feel equivalent. And for the vast majority of people, 0 to 60 in just over 4 seconds is plenty fast. But the one differentiator here is that the Tesla Model 3 long-range dual motor does have an option to purchase acceleration boost, and this option can be purchased after delivery for $2,000, and tests have shown that it drops your 0 to 60 time down to about 3.7 seconds. But in reality, if performance is everything to you, you're probably looking for the Model 3 Performance and neither of the cars that I'm talking about today. So as far as suspension and handling, both of these cars are very heavy for their size, with the Model 3 at about 4,000 pounds and the Polestar 2 coming in at 4,200 pounds. So I wouldn't expect either of these cars to feel like a Miata. And having not driven the Polestar 2, I have to rely heavily on reviews of those that have. But everyone that has driven this car seems to have great things to say about the overall driving experience. The Polestar 2 seems to offer a very balanced and comfortable ride. Now the Model 3 also offers a fairly smooth and comfortable ride, but I think the Polestar has the edge in this one based on everything I've heard. And ultimately, if you're trying to decide between these two cars, make sure you drive both so you can make this determination for yourself. Okay, now let's talk about range and efficiency. There's no getting around the fact that the Tesla Model 3 is more efficient than the Polestar 2. The Polestar 2 is heavier and less aerodynamic, and even with a bigger battery, it has less range than the long-range dual-motor Tesla Model 3. Based on the WLTP range test, the Polestar 2 got 291 miles of range, whereas the Model 3 got 348. And the Polestar has yet to be rated by the EPA, but they're estimating a 275-mile range compared to the 322-mile range of the Tesla. And a roughly 50-mile difference in range may not be all that significant to some people, but I can say that for me, it actually is. Bjorn Nyland has done some range tests of the Polestar 2 and the Tesla Model 3, and his results show that in the Polestar you could expect about 200 miles of range doing 75 miles an hour on the highway, whereas the Tesla Model 3 could get about 243 miles at the same speed. And this was using the slightly less efficient Tesla Model 3 Performance, so the long-range dual motor with 18-inch wheels and aero covers would definitely get even more than this. And this is really important for me for long day trips to go skiing or hiking. One of the locations that I go skiing is 100 miles each way, and that would be cutting it close with the Polestar 2, especially in cold weather where the efficiency drops. But the longer range Model 3 can do this quite comfortably without having to stop to charge. Speaking of which, let's talk about charging. So when it comes to charging, both of these cars can use level 2 charging networks such as ChargePoint, and coverage of these networks is generally pretty good. But when it comes to level 3 fast chargers, it isn't quite so equal, at least here in the United States. My impression is that this is not as much of an issue in Europe as it is here in the US, but correct me down below if I'm wrong. Tesla's supercharger network is very advanced here in the US and covers the vast majority of major highways and routes. And then compare that to the non-Tesla fast charges throughout the US, and you'll see a big difference. And most of these are being built by Electrify America, so thanks Volkswagen. Another big difference between these two networks is the availability and reliability of the chargers themselves. Any Tesla supercharging location generally has at least 6 stalls, but could be more than 20. And most of the Electrify America stops, at least by me, only have 2 stalls. And also based on a lot of the reviews of these non-Tesla chargers, they have a lot of reliability issues where people show up and they're not working. And I've never had that problem with the Tesla supercharging network, so as of right now, I think you're much more likely to have an issue trying to charge with the Polestar 2 compared to the Tesla Model 3. And eventually the non-Tesla high-speed charging networks will catch up, but it's going to take time here in the US and no one seems to want to pay for it. On top of that, prices at Tesla superchargers are generally lower than non-Tesla fast chargers. And the pricing scheme is way easier to understand, where they just charge you by the kilowatt hour or time depending on what state you live in. And now take a look at the pricing scheme for the Electrify America chargers near me. Okay, now let's touch upon charging speed. The Tesla Model 3 can charge up to 250 kilowatts, while the Polestar 2 is limited to 150 kilowatts. And assuming you have chargers that can actually reach these levels, charging stops with the Tesla Model 3 are going to be quicker than in the Polestar 2. Bjorn did another video comparing the charging times of these two vehicles. And results of this test showed that on a road trip, your charging stops on the Polestar 2 are going to be about double what they would be in the Tesla Model 3. And that's roughly a 15 to 20 minute stop for the Tesla Model 3 or a 30 to 40 minute stop for the Polestar 2, but I'll link that video down below in case you want to watch that. Alright, moving on to tech. Both of these cars are loaded with technology, each with their own approach. I think Polestar made a very smart move partnering with Google to make the Polestar 2 the first car with built-in Android Auto. I think we're going to start seeing this in a lot of cars going forward. The Polestar 2 also has some very cool matrix headlights that can shut off individual LEDs to not blind oncoming traffic. But unfortunately, due to regulations, we don't get these in the US and Canada. The Polestar 2 also comes with driver assist technology, which will allow the car to adjust speed and steer for you on the highway. And this is very similar to Tesla's autopilot system that comes standard on the Tesla Model 3. And there are a ton of videos diving into the specific tech of each of these vehicles, but I want to focus on the differences. One differentiator that I see for the Tesla Model 3 would be its Sentry Mode and dash cam. These features give drivers a lot of peace of mind, and I wish that Polestar would implement something similar. And even though Polestar has promised over-the-air updates, unfortunately it doesn't seem like this is something they would be able to implement. The Polestar 2 only has one front-facing camera on board, whereas the Tesla Model 3 has cameras on every angle, allowing for that 360-degree coverage. I'm also really curious what over-the-air updates Polestar is going to implement, and we haven't really gotten any information from them on this. But Tesla has proven that they're committed to fairly regular over-the-air updates. They've used these to roll out countless new features and even performance upgrades, and only time will tell what Polestar does. But overall, both of these cars are very advanced with technology and have some form of future-proofing, which is a trend I want to see continue in the automotive world. Alright, now let's compare the cost of each vehicle. Now in the US, the Model 3 definitely wins this category, but I've heard that in some European countries, the Polestar 2 is actually cheaper. In the US, the Polestar 2 starts at over $61,000 including the destination fee. And the Tesla Model 3 long-range dual motor with destination fee starts at just over $48,000, making the Polestar 2 $13,000 more than the Tesla Model 3 long-range dual motor. Now the good news is that the Polestar 2 is eligible for the federal tax credit of $7,500, which brings the effective price down below $54,000, but still more than $5,000 more than the Tesla Model 3. And unfortunately, the way the tax credit works, you still have to pay that money up front, but then the next year you would get the $7,500 back in your tax return. So you would have to finance and pay taxes on the full $61,000. And with an 8% sales tax rate, that means that the Polestar 2 would cost over $1,000 more in taxes based on the higher sticker price. But as of right now, the Model 3 is definitely more cost effective in the US, but hopefully the Polestar 2 prices come down as production ramps up. Next, let's talk about appearance. Now this category is totally subjective, and I happen to think that both of these cars look pretty good, but it's totally down to personal preference. I think the Polestar really has that Scandinavian look inside and out. My only issue with the exterior looks are that I think the rear is a bit Polestarizing. For me personally, I think the trunk is just a little too boxy. But overall, I I think it looks great and I could definitely get over this. Now on the interior, I personally love everything except for one thing, and that's the bezel on the center screen. Ever since this was pointed out, I cannot unsee this. It seems like such an easy thing for Polestar to change, and it makes this screen look like a 10-year-old tablet. So I'm hoping this is something Polestar fixes in future versions of this car. Now as far as the Model 3, I actually wasn't a big fan of the look of this car when it first came out, but it grew on me a lot after seeing them in person and getting rid of the chrome. And I still don't totally love the side profile from certain angles. I think it looks a little disproportionate. Now on the inside of the Model 3, it definitely takes minimalism to a whole nother level. And I understand that this can be too much for people, but I got used to it pretty quickly and I like it now. But that's enough about appearance. Some will say that the Model 3 looks like a melting jelly bean, and some will say that the Polestar looks like a Scion. So yeah, totally down to personal preference. Alright, moving on to build quality. I think Tesla has come a long way with the build quality of the Tesla Model 3 since it went into production in 2017, but it's still far from perfect. And I made a separate video about all the issues I've had with my Tesla Model 3, which for reference was manufactured in the summer of 2019. And I think the vast majority of the issues remaining with the Model 3 are related to fit and finish, not necessarily anything that's going to result in a mechanical issue with the car. But for this category, I think fit and finish is definitely going to be better on the Polestar 2. And based on the reviews so far, it's going to be a quieter ride in the Polestar 2 and definitely feel a little more luxurious. And I think you're more likely to have random noises and rattles in the Model 3. But as of right now, we don't actually have all that much actual data on the build quality of the Polestar 2. So this is mostly an educated guess. And obviously every car that Polestar sends to a journalist to have them review is going to be double and triple checked for defects, so I'm taking those with a grain of salt for right now. One note that I do want to make though is that since Polestar is partially owned by Volvo and is designed in Sweden, I think a lot of people assume that they also manufacture their cars in Sweden, but this is not true. Volvo and Polestar are owned by Geely, which is a Chinese company, and the Polestar 2 is being manufactured in China. Now, I've never driven a car that was built in China, so I don't know if this is really a good or bad thing. Alright, now let's compare the practicality of these two cars. And as far as storage volume, the two cars are very similar, with the Polestar having a slight edge. However, the big difference here is that the Polestar 2 has a hatchback instead of a standard trunk that the Model 3 has. And that larger opening is going to allow you to put a lot of larger items into the back of the Polestar. And I actually made a separate video about what you can fit in a Tesla Model 3, and it might be more than you think. So I'll link that down below just in case you're wondering whether or not things like skis and bikes are going to fit in that car. But when it comes to practicality, the Polestar is actually a little more like the Tesla Model Y than it is the Model 3. Besides the hatchback, the Polestar is also a taller vehicle compared to the Model 3. And with this, it appears to have a higher ground clearance than the Model 3. But for the life of me, I cannot find the ground clearance of the Polestar 2. So if you have this measurement, please let me know in a comment down below. I'm guessing it's around 6 to 6.5 inches compared to the Model 3's 5.5 inches of ground clearance. Another interesting difference between these two cars when it comes to practicality is that the Polestar 2 has some protective cladding around the wheel arches to protect the car from rocks and debris. And this definitely gives the car a little more of a rugged edge, more commonly seen on crossovers and SUVs. And like most sedans, the Model 3 looks like it was designed for a little more fair weather, so I would definitely expect to see more Polestars on dirt roads compared to Model 3s. But for the record, that has not stopped me from driving my Tesla Model 3 on dirt roads, so stay tuned if you want to see how mine holds up over time. Alright, finally we've reached the last category for this comparison: safety. And I think this is a quick one because both of these cars are incredibly safe. The Polestar is essentially a Volvo product with an established record for producing some of the safest cars on the road. And Tesla also has a great record for safety, with the Model 3 acing all of its crash tests. And on top of that, both of these cars are loaded with safety tech. So I don't think that this category is a distinguishing factor for either of these vehicles because they're both incredibly safe and you're really not going to do any better. Okay, so in conclusion, I think it boils down to a few key factors that set these cars apart, depending on what matters to you most. The Model 3 might be the better option for you if you plan to go on road trips or longer day trips, based on the longer range, charging network, and higher charging speeds. The Model 3 might also be a better option for you if you care more about pure acceleration and want the option for acceleration boost. It might also be the car for you if you want a car that's a little more future-proof, with a few more tech features, proven over-the-air updates, and the potential for autonomous driving. And finally, the Model 3 is probably the best option for you if you're just looking for the cheaper option, at least in the US. And now let's talk about why the Polestar 2 might be the better option. The Polestar 2 is probably a better option for you if you're looking for a sophisticated, yet slightly more traditional interior. The Polestar 2 might also be the better option for you if you're really looking for that luxury feel in terms of cabin noise, build quality, and ride comfort. And if you don't really plan on driving more than 200 miles in a day, then the lower range and slower charging speeds shouldn't be a major consideration. And finally, the Polestar 2 might be the better option for you if you're more concerned with practicality or ruggedness. The Polestar 2 really has the advantage here being a taller hatchback that has that protection around the wheel arches. But then there are subjective things to consider, such as appearance. Maybe you just hate the way that one of these cars looks, and if that's the case, I'm not really sure why you're watching this video. Just go buy the other one. And for my final take on comparing these vehicles, I think the Model 3 is like a smartphone that also happens to be a car, and the Polestar 2 is a luxurious car that happens to work like your smartphone. But that's all for today. Let me know in the comments down below which car you would rather own. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. But that's all for today. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.